But so we've let episode 5 of the Riley Files, our 12-part series, sit up on the website for the past week because it's really the centerpiece of the whole series. It's the crown jewel. Now, the other 11 episodes are really good, but like this one got to the big one, the big question. Why exactly did Lincoln Riley leave Oklahoma for USC? And so our Oklahoma insider, Keegan Renault, in the conversation I had with him, we didn't find kind of like a smoking gun or like a gotcha moment. Like it was this day at this time, this place when it all happened. But Keegan and I were able to piece together, and Keegan's reportage from having followed Oklahoma football the past several years, we can be pretty confident in this general assertion that at some point there was a meeting, there was a sit down, negotiations involving Riley, Oklahoma athletic director Joe Castiglione, and Bob Stoops, probably either sitting in the room or at least guiding the negotiations at some point along the way. And obviously the national narrative has been for the past year since the Oklahoma and Texas move to the SEC. The national narrative has been Lincoln Riley didn't want to coach in the SEC. He wanted to be in the Pac-12. Now he's going to be in the Big Ten, where he would not have to deal with the SEC monster and, Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and Jimbo Fisher and Brian Kelly all in the same conference. That's been the national narrative. The SEC has a role in this, but it's not what everyone originally thought, or at least it hasn't been the prevailing national storyline. The SEC angle is this, and your program with some Oklahoma guests a few months ago on the Voice of College Football, that entered into my discussion with Keegan Renault on the Riley Files. And I asked him about this point in an earlier episode of the series. So Brent Venables is getting the investments and the buy-in from donors and boosters that Lincoln Riley didn't get. So why is that? So when the move to the SEC occurred, Keegan and I pieced together, doing detective work, that at some point there was a negotiation between Riley and Joe Castiglione, which amounted to, okay, Riley's saying to Joe Castiglione in some form or fashion, it almost certainly happened along these lines. I'm not getting 100% investment. I'm not getting all the facilities. I'm not getting all the resources. I know that you're holding at least something back. Now that we're going to the SEC, it's time to pony up. It's time to give me everything I want in terms of facilities, investment, the whole deal, the whole enchilada. And Joe Castiglione said no. Now, again, we don't have a report that says on this date, this time, this place, it happened, but common sense tells you that there was that kind of exchange behind the scenes, behind closed doors. There was that kind of moment. And doesn't that sound like a pretty honest and convincing rendering of what happened and why it happened? That, of course, Lincoln Riley's a supreme competitor. He's made 3 college football playoffs, won 4 Big 12 championships in a row, 6 if you count the 2 years as offensive coordinator. The idea that he would back down from a challenge, that was never convincing, all right? But of course, we were wondering, why would coaches don't leave programs like Oklahoma. They don't, unless maybe the Dallas Cowboys or some really elite special job is there. But generally, you don't leave Oklahoma for anything. But this would be it, right? I'm going into the big bad SEC. I'm going against Nick Saban. I'm going against Kirby Smart. I need maximum investment. And so the reality that, Oklahoma insiders know that Brent Venables is getting the investments Lincoln Riley didn't get, that tells you something, right? That tells you that Lincoln Riley wasn't getting maximum 1,000% commitment from the Oklahoma donors and boosters. At USC, he is getting everything he wants from Mike Bone and President Carol Folt. He's getting the maximum. He's getting everything on a silver platter. And this move to the Big Ten, was Lincoln Riley clued into it? Probably not. But he knows he's getting full investment as he goes to the Big Ten. So it's a switch up. It's another switch for him, akin to suddenly being told, oh, you're going to be coaching in the SEC, not the Big 12 last year. Now you're going to be coaching in the Big 10, not the Pac-12 in 2024. Why is he not angry about it? Because he's getting everything he wants at USC, which is the contrast with Oklahoma. So that's really what we discovered on episode 5 of the Riley Files. That's why it's the crown jewel of this series. And hope that everyone tuning in here to the Voice of College Football, if you haven't been following our step-by-step series, you definitely want to listen to episode 5, but of course you want to follow the whole way through.
And I will grab and drop that link in the live chat here in just a couple seconds, but I've got a half page of notes to review because this was certainly an intriguing conversation and development of scenarios that led to a lot of conclusions and a lot of reasonable conclusions. So I'll take on the SEC narrative here first, because I think it's reasonable to believe exactly what Keegan set up as. There's a difference between being scared of the competition in a particular conference versus being shy or hesitant about participating in that conference if you do not have the resources and the facilities and the wherewithal to compete at the highest level in that league. However, I would say you can understand, even with the resources and the backing required to compete at the very highest level in a particular league, the SEC, let's say, that you would want to possibly, maybe this would be a tiebreaker of a decision, that you could go to Clemson, Ohio State, USC, and in a situation where I'm not competing each and every week or many weeks of the season versus a like power. So if you go to the SEC, and if you're in one of the programs, Alabama, Georgia are at the top right now, but LSU certainly has the capabilities and the resources to compete there. Texas A&M does, and there's a couple others that may or may not, depending on that particular coach and commitment. Let's say Florida, will put them in the mix. So you have the advantage over roughly half to 3/4 of the league. You're playing Missouri, you're playing Mississippi State, and they're really good, strong football programs, but nowhere close to the resources that we're talking about at the schools we're talking about. But you have a larger pool of competitors at that prime spot, as opposed to being at USC, where, okay, Utah's a tough out, Oregon can be a tough out, but if we're running on 8 cylinders, nobody can touch us. At Ohio State, to a lesser degree, because there is Michigan, there is Penn State, there is Wisconsin. There is some really strong competition there, but still, Ohio State on all 8 cylinders has shown us in the last 20 years, you're not competing with us in this conference. So I can understand the narrative, but I can also see where maybe some of the critics could be, I'm not saying that they are, that if you're looking at the measured approach, that you would opt to go to a USC instead of the SEC because of having that advantage on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. And as we kind of dig into these tensions a little bit deeper, I think part of this discussion is that in the summer of 2021, Lincoln Riley was preparing for a season in which Oklahoma was widely viewed as a frontline national championship contender. I mean, this was the 2021 was viewed as the Oklahoma team with the best chance since the 2017 team, which narrowly lost to Georgia in the Rose Bowl, the college football playoff semifinal. The 2021 team was supposed to be the team that was going to get over the hump, get the Big 12 and the Sooners into the college football playoff national championship game. We finally break that semifinal drought. So that pressure weighed very heavily on Lincoln Riley. And so if we can generally say, maybe not that his mind was made up, that he wanted out of Oklahoma in late August or early September, but certainly that pressure, that tension point was weighing on his mind. When the 2021 season didn't go the way he wanted, I think it's reasonable to say that kind of made his displeasure, Lincoln Riley's internal displeasure at his larger situation, even greater than it initially was. And that if he had hit the ball out of the park at Oklahoma in 2021, maybe he says, hey, I can now leverage this to get everything I want, stay, make it work. But when the 2021 season didn't go that great, that was kind of the tipping point that pushed him toward USC's arms. And you can imagine just that he was dissatisfied to begin with, thinking that he deserved, maximum investment in the program. And so when this very important high expectation season didn't pan out the way he had hoped for, that was really the ultimate decisive moment in his mind and in his thought process.
So maybe I missed this, although I took meticulous notes, or maybe this has been covered elsewhere, because in a 12-part series, I know that you guys covered this. So Keegan started out the conversation by saying at the outset of the 21 season, something just wasn't right. And then he started to go through some various scenarios of possible trust issues, but that something wasn't right. This team wasn't unified. There were distractions. There was lack of commitment. And then we saw it in the performance. They come out and they barely win games against the likes of a 2-10 Tulane team, for example, in week 1. Okay. What was the timeline of course, Clay Helton was fired week 3, something in that range?
Yeah, right after week 2. Yep. Before week 3. Yep.
So at what point do we think, like, Keegan seemed to have been setting this just kind of atmosphere of, being non-committal to the program amongst players and coaches deep into training camp, let's say in August, but never put his finger on why that was. So we don't think that was necessarily Riley and USC already having conversations, and that being origin.
So I think what we can reasonably pinpoint is not that Riley was thinking about USC, but he was dissatisfied with the larger overall situation at Oklahoma, and the USC entry point was probably in November, and we didn't exactly nail this down, but in future episodes of the Riley Files, Keegan does make the point, and so it's a spoiler alert, but really on a small scale. It's like I'm not giving away the store here. The Baylor game, when Oklahoma got trampled by Baylor, that was a moment when the players had really checked out. That was when the players clearly had disconnected from Lincoln Riley, that whatever had happened the previous few months of that season, the thread was just getting more frayed, pretty much snapped. And the Bedlam game, I mean, it was a rivalry game, so the players, were motivated by hatred of Oklahoma State. But in general, the Baylor game is really a moment when it was clear that the players weren't buying in, and that Lincoln Riley, really had half of his brain, thinking about what my future is going to be. Since, of course, the season had already become a disappointment, that the playoff was not going to be part of Oklahoma's future that particular season. So the Baylor game was like a mental checkout point, that you could see players not fully invested, that you could see Lincoln Riley, not having the command of the locker room, not having the command of his team. That's a particular marker in terms of when we can reasonably think that, he was not only dissatisfied with his situation at OU, which would be an August reality, an early September reality, but USC probably entered the picture sometime around that game. Whether it was before or after, who's to say? But, in early November, one can reasonably assume that USC was on Lincoln Riley's mind.